Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're gonna get our Halloween on with this spooky haunted house painting. Now, if you're a child of the 80s like me, you might remember the old scary stories to tell in the dark books. I loved those books when I was a kid, and I'll admit it, I still read them today. And my favorite part of those books was the artwork by Stephen Gammell. And so that was really inspiring to me. So I wanted to create a painting today that kind of fit into his style. So this isn't a copy of one of his pieces, but I did take several elements and some of the ways that he incorporated elements together to create this painting today. Now, before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and then check out the video description below for a full list of materials. Now let's get started. All right, today I have a brand new 16 by 12 inch canvas, and I did apply a pretty generous layer of gesso to this canvas, but I didn't sand it. Now, the reason I used the gesso and didn't sand it is because it creates a bit of a tooth, a very dry surface to the canvas. And when I'm scrubbing, like I'm gonna do on the background here, I feel like it grabs the paint, it holds it and prevents any texture from the canvas from showing, but it also creates a very smooth blend between the colors. So that's why I used the gesso today. I'm gonna start with my number 12 cloud brush, and I am using it dry. And as always, these brushes are available on my website. I've decided at the top I want it to be darker, and as it comes down, it's gonna slowly get lighter. And then I might have it be a little bit darker here at the bottom than in the middle as well, but we'll see when we get there. So I'm gonna take my brush and I'm gonna go into my black. I'm not gonna get a ton of black though, because I want the top of this to be darker, but I don't want it to be black. So I've got just some black, and I'm gonna pick up some white. And if this ends up being too dark or too light, I can adjust that. I'm gonna come right onto my canvas, and I'm gonna start with kind of this spirally motion. See how I'm doing that? But just kind of quickly, just get it covered on there. Just kind of wiping at the top to make sure I get all of that canvas covered there. And then I'll come back and just kind of spiral through it. Try not to create worms. So I know that sounds funny, but what I mean is when I tell people to do this sometimes, I'll see people who have done it and they say that they don't like it because what they end up with is that, like a line like that all the way across their canvas. And just because we're corkscrewing like this doesn't mean that we have to have worms. So kind of do it in a direction and then change it. And if you can see too many of those little corkscrew lines, just tap over them to break that up. We're not necessarily going for clouds. We're not trying to make clouds. So don't focus on creating specific shapes. Really just focus on your colors. And every time I pick up paint, the color is a little bit different. Maybe it's a little darker or a little lighter than the last area. Now I'm just gonna pick up a little bit of white. I still have all of that dark gray on here. This next section, see, it's a little bit lighter. And I'm leaving that top edge. See how it's a little different right there? I'm gonna leave that because that kind of helps insinuate that look that it's a very cloudy sky, but we don't have to really focus on creating clouds. So see, that could look like worms if I just went across and stopped, but I'm gonna come back over it and break it up. Sorry, my easel is kind of loud when I do this. As I'm working my way down, I'm picking up less and less black and more white. And once I hit about the center of the canvas, I'm probably gonna stop picking up black altogether. Just pick up white and let that little bit of gray that's on my brush add the little hints of gray into our fade. And I'll show you what I mean when I get there. If you don't have my cloud brushes, you really can use any brush that you like for this. My one caution is to make sure that you're not using a really nice brush, because if you're scrubbing like this with a brush, it can fray out the ends, and then you'd have to dedicate it to scrubbing because you could ruin the brush. But my brushes are made specifically with this in mind. So actually, the more you scrub with these brushes, the better they're gonna be for scrubbing. So you don't have to worry about that with these ones. That's why I call them cloud brushes, because we're scrubbing and we're making clouds with them, and we don't have to worry about ruining them. I think I'm done picking up black. I think I'm just gonna pick up white for the most part from here on out. And this is a good workout for your arm. My arm is starting to get a little sore. All right, now down here, because if I keep going, the bottom is just gonna be pretty much white, and I don't want that. I want there to still be some hints of that gray in there. So I'm gonna pick up my white, and I'm gonna come in and just pick up a little point of black. Can you see there's not a ton of black there? I just wanna make sure that it doesn't become solid white. Now, if you don't have gesso, you can do this without gesso, but I find that when I scrub like this on the canvas by itself, I have a harder time getting a smooth look. And the more you scrub at it, it kind of scrubs it off of the canvas. But the gesso really grabs the paint. And then I don't worry about, scrubbing it off of the canvas so much. I just feel like that's a little dark right there at the top of this shape, and I'm probably not even gonna see it because of my ground, but I'm gonna break it up just in case anyway. I'm just gonna finish down to the bottom of the canvas, adding a little bit of black as I go, and then we'll move on. All right, there's our cloudy, stormy sky. Now I'm gonna let this dry completely before we start working on our foreground elements. All right, our background is dry, and now I have a piece of chalk, and hopefully you'll be able to see this color okay on this background. And this is just sidewalk chalk, as you can tell. It's nothing fancy. So decide where you want all of your elements. I think I want my little haunted house right here, and then I'm gonna have some ground and kind of a big creepy tree over here. So I first want to decide where my ground is, and I'm going to put the ground where the house sits right about at the 1/3 mark. And we'll have it come around, kind of down a bit. I want it to be quite narrow and precarious looking where the house sits, but kind of come down a little bit farther right here. And I just realized right this second that this actually looks a lot, the ground looks a lot like the ground in the Surreal Gold Leaf Tree video, but it's not gonna look like that when we're done. Now our house. So I'm gonna decide where the center of my house is first. I don't wanna just start drawing the sides because my house might be placed weird. So I think I want the center of my house right about there. I'm gonna take it up as tall as I want my house. And then I can come off of the sides there and draw the roof, the pitch of the roof. Make sure that these are at the same angle. It doesn't matter if it's got a really dramatic angle or kind of a flatter angle. I think think I am going to go for a little more of a dramatic angle. And make sure that they come down about to the same spot on each side. Don't have one end down here and one end up here. And we'll draw the sides. And I'm going to have like a little piece coming off of the side, a little angle on the roof there. Down, and that's going down into the lower part of the ground, and that's okay. Let's have a little piece of a roof that angles off there. Actually, I think I'm going to bring this out just a little bit further. Just pay no attention to that chalk line. Just keep sketching it until it looks about like you want it to. And if you decide that that is just absolutely not what you want, just take a damp brush and wipe it away. Just wipe that chalk away. Don't worry if you can still see a ghost of the chalk, because once we're done, just like in the doll video last week where I showed you how he cleaned up, it'll clean off later. Okay, let's do that part again. There we go. I think that's more along the lines of what I was looking for. But draw your house however you want. My house has some weird little roof pieces, but yours doesn't have to if you don't want it to. So this line is part of the building back here. I'm gonna make another line right here. That's gonna be the support for this piece. This is like a little porch here. Maybe we'll have some stairs. A little porch with some stairs right there that leads down into the ground. Now I'm going to take my 1/2 inch flat and I'm just going to wet it in my jar a little bit. You can use matte medium instead of water if you like. I will be using some matte medium later on. So I'm going to pick up some white and just a little bit of black. I just want a gray color. It doesn't matter how gray it is. I don't want it to be too dark though, because then it's going to be hard on the next part. You can even go with pure white here if you like. And I'm just going to fill in all of the inside of my house. Use the very edge of your brush to get those nice crisp lines. Notice I'm not trying to make a crisp line like this. That makes it really difficult. And then you get a ridge of paint right up at the edge there, and I don't want that. So I'm really just kind of evening out all of this color. I'm not worried about the direction of my brush strokes right here. Try to keep the different elements of your house separate. So I'll show you what I mean here in just a second. But you don't want to just paint in everything so that you can't tell which piece is the roof in the back versus this little overhang over the porch. So I'm going to get just a little bit of a darker color and fill in this bit of roof. Now when I get to where it meets up with the roof of the main part of the house, I'm just going to cut right up to it, and see now the color helps me differentiate between the two. And if you need to leave just a hint of your chalk outline showing there, you can do that too. We're going to cover it up later, so do it however you need to so that you can still tell which is which part of the house. And same thing here. I'm leaving a little bit of that chalk outline showing there. I am picking up a hint of that pink into my paint. I'm not terribly worried about it right at this point because I'm going to add a few layers. But if you feel like you're picking up too much of your chalk color, then once it's dry, just do one more layer over top of it and that should take care of it. In our little area under the porch, I'm going to go a little bit darker. We're gonna have our front door and a window and all kinds of things in here. I'm gonna make sure that I don't take this all the way to this line because this is just a support beam. And remember, this is an old, abandoned, haunted house. So if it's a little crooked, that's okay. Maybe it's falling down. And I'm kind of, you know, mimicking the style of Stephen Gammell, and a lot of the buildings in his paintings were really askew and the perspective was off. So you don't have to worry about that. I'm gonna go a little bit darker here for the porch. And I did take the porch all the way to that support beam. And I'm just gonna let it kind of disappear into the ground. Let's go ahead and draw the stairs right now anyway. So there's gonna be one stair, and we're gonna kind of come out a bit for another stair. And maybe out just a bit more. However many you feel like you can fit in there. And I'm gonna have those stairs come all the way across here. It's not just gonna be on that little corner. Now that we've already started working on the ground, let's just keep going with that. I'm just gonna pick up more black and lightly come in here. This doesn't have to be a crisp line. We're gonna really distress the line anyway later. So I think it's better now if you don't put in a crisp line, because then you won't have to try so hard to get rid of it later. And just feather that into that gray color for the stairs. Same back here. I'm not gonna worry about having a crisp line in the background. That's gonna help it seem overgrown and weedy. And just fill in this whole area. All right, while we wait for all that to dry, let's add some little elements back here. And I think I'm gonna do like some grasses and maybe an old fence that's falling down. So I'm gonna use my number 3 round brush, and I wet it in my jar a little. And I'm gonna get a little point of white and mix it in with my black until I get a very dark gray color. I wanna make sure it's not solid black, but I want it to be pretty dark still. Probably about like that. We'll test that and see how that looks. Now my fence is just gonna be very, very simple. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna kind of lay my brush flat and just kind of scoot it up. We did something similar to this in, let's see, the video with the chair against the wall. We did this on the ground there. And so that's really all I'm doing, just to kind of give an overgrown look there. Bring that little piece of ground up a bit. Okay, so I'm gonna go back in, and to do the fence, I'm just gonna come from here, and maybe I'll just draw a piece of a post, get a little bit more paint on there. There we go. So just kind of a crooked post, and just bring that down just a few, and they can be crooked, they can be falling off, they can be anything you like. Just an old looking wobbly fence. Maybe let's have another little piece that kind of comes up like that. And I know it's blending in with our stairs right now and looks strange, but once we do the layers on the stairs, it will push that back into the distance. Let's do another little piece of a fence, maybe right here. You might not be able to see that once we do our tree, but that's okay. It's gonna help me remember that I want a little bit of a path right here. Kind of going between these two fences, these old broken fences. Let's stick with that color. I'm gonna add a little extra drop of water because the water is gonna help it flow better to get really crisp details, more so than the matte medium does. I rolled my brush to a super tiny point, and I'm gonna come in here just with the very tip of the brush and just kind of flick some small grasses. If your grasses are getting quite fat and you're losing control of them, you're just putting too much pressure. Can you see how I have my pinky resting on my canvas? That's helping me steady my hand. And then my brush, all the motion is in the tip of my fingers. You know, I'm not holding it like this and putting pressure and moving my whole hand to make a grass. So it's like this. So I've got my pinky braced, just the tip of my brush is on my plate, and I'm just moving the tip of these fingers, see? Sometimes my brush touches, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it touches more than others. And that's gonna help us get a little variation in grasses. But if you find you're doing things like this, it's probably because, see, I have more pressure on my brush. It's all about pressure. Little tiny pressure, and you can get some nice small grasses. And maybe we've got a couple little sticks that are trying to grow up into a crazy little tree or something there. Do all kinds of fun stuff in here. And we can even do the flat again and kind of pull up some little wild things. And we've got a little old tree growing up back here somewhere. I'm gonna go to my long liner brush for this part. This brush is so much fun to make trees with, and we're gonna use it quite a bit later. So I'm gonna put it there, kind of put a bit of pressure on it, see how much it's bending, and just kind of wiggle the brush as I go, and that helps me get some really jagged, kind of crazy lines. The more delicate you are with this liner brush, the smoother your branches are gonna be. But if you get in there and you just let it kind of do whatever it's gonna do, you get some really nice kind of craggy haunted house branches. And that's what I want. Oh, I forgot the little support post on our house here. This is probably not the right brush for it. That was for sure not the right brush for it, so I'll just go back to my number 3. Okay, before we continue on our house, I'm gonna take my cloud brush, wet it in my jar a bit, and just wipe a good amount of it off. I don't need a soaking wet brush. And then I'm just gonna scrape away the rest of that chalk. Hopefully that pink chalk comes off all the way, otherwise we're gonna have a pink haze around our building. Maybe don't use pink chalk. I used it so that you guys could see. I am gonna experiment. I've still got a pink haze there. So something like that happens to you, don't be afraid to experiment. So what I'm gonna do is take some matte medium and my 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm gonna load it up with some matte medium and a little bit of white, not a ton of white. So if you can tell there, see, it's pretty transparent. And I'm gonna come in around my house and see if I can cover some of that up a little bit. And then wherever I have hard lines, I'm gonna work in small areas. I'm just gonna pick up some matte medium and see if I can we'll create a little bit of a fog around the house. Could be an interesting effect. I'm not worried about going over my house because we're gonna paint that in just a minute. But let's see what happens here. A little more medium, because I have a bit of a line there, kind of scrape it out. I didn't pick up any white. I know you can see white, but that's just because the medium is kind of white when it's wet. But as it dries, it'll go transparent. And it looks like that's kind of covering the white, but then our house will also kind of have a little bit of a hazy, mysterious aura around it, and I kind of like that idea. So just laying down my matte medium white mixture, a little bit of just matte medium, get rid of any lines. And you can smear it with your finger. Let's go ahead and take that over top of our little distant trees and even the fence. Now it'll kind of look like there's some fog going on back there. Kind of like that, actually. See, so when you have things that happen that you don't like, don't throw up your hands and say, well, I messed it up, or just decide to live with something you don't like. Experiment and see what happens, because you might discover something that you wouldn't have otherwise discovered. And if I decided that I really don't like that, then I can just paint the background again. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, we'll just let that dry and see how it looks at the end. All right, so what we're gonna do now is start giving some texture to our house so it looks like it's made out of old boards. And I'm gonna use my number 8 Bright, and I'm gonna start by loading up with matte medium. I want to make a black that is very, very transparent. So see how much matte medium I have there? I'm gonna come into my black, just pull a little bit out, and mix my medium in with it. Test it over here, see how transparent that is? That's what I'm looking for. So I'm gonna load up my brush with that, and I'm not gonna get crazy trying to draw boards. I'm gonna let the shape of my brush do all the work for me. So I'm gonna start right at the edge and just streak it over. When I get the little breaks there, I just picked up some matte medium. I'm just gonna smooth over top of it. And all I'm really worried about is just getting the shape on there, and see how my brush kind of indicates boards by itself, and they can overlap a little. You know, maybe a piece of the board was removed at some point and another board was put on it. It's just an old, spooky looking house. And you can do the windows before this part if you want. I just think it's easier to do this part and then put the windows on top of it, because we're gonna go back over it with some white in this same way, and I didn't want to have to try and avoid going over the windows with the white. Just a little matte medium to smooth out. I don't want brush, well, I do want the brush marks, but what I don't want is where the paint starts to wear off of the brush and I get that fuzzy texture look. Some of my paint is heavier than others. Sometimes it's lighter and thinner. I'll come back and do this side in a minute. Now the first layer that you do, it's probably gonna look a little weird. You're gonna think, well, that doesn't look like boards, it just looks like stripes or brush strokes or whatever. But again, we're gonna do a couple of layers, and every time we do a layer, it's gonna change it a little bit. Now when we get up to the roof, I'm gonna adjust the way I'm holding my brush, because where my roof is angled, if I come in like this, I'm gonna have these little triangles that are missing, but I also don't wanna come from here and pull it down this way. So what I'm gonna do is get my brush right up on the edge at the same angle as the roof, but I'm still gonna pull it to the side. So I've got it at an angle and I'm still pulling it to the side. And I know that can feel a little awkward. You feel like you should be pulling it down like that, but don't do that. Another thing you can do on this roof here is bring the boards down. So you could always start there and bring it straight down, you know, to a line in here somewhere. And we'll do this other side. Same thing, bring it over so it overlaps that first set of lines. Bring it right into it. Now let's do our little entryway. And I mixed this up just a little bit heavier on the side of black. It's not quite as transparent as that first color we did, because this part's more in shadow. It's got an overhang on it. I want these boards to go straight up and down, but you can do them however you want. I feel like if they go straight up and down, that's going to help set them apart a bit more from this part of the house. The only place I'm really being careful when I'm doing this is right at the edges. So like here, I might use the chisel edge of my brush just to make sure I have a nice crisp edge there at the side of the house. And then I can bring it down. Let's go up from the bottom. Don't worry if you come down into here. We haven't painted any of that yet. A little matte medium, just to keep some variation in the color there. And we'll do the little overhang. And you can do the boards however you like, but remember they are boards, so they probably wouldn't come, down like that at the same angle. I'm gonna draw that line first, because I kind of lost it just a little bit. So I'm going to come from the edge of my house and straight over. And let's do the roof. I'm going to go a bit darker on the roof. I would like a pretty solid roof. We'll add a little variation to it, but I have a heavier black mixture here than in any of the other areas. So again, I'm going to make sure I can see the edge of that roof. So can you tell, I know I'm going to get asked questions about, could I just mix black and white? You can certainly do that. You can just mix black and white for gray areas if you like here. But there's a difference in the colors that you get with transparency versus mixing. So the grays that I'm getting here are much different than the grays that I get from mixing black and white. So layering and mixing don't always create the exact same effect. I'm just going to take this color down my little support pole here. There we go. That's starting to dry pretty good. I'm going to mix up a little bit more of a blacker mixture. So again, it's not quite as transparent as that first layer of color that we did. And I'm going to use this one a little bit thinner. I'm not going to make it quite as heavy. I'm not going to cover quite as much of the house, but I'm going to take some of this darker mixture, more opaque mixture, and streak it again for a bit more variation. Some of my brush strokes are going to be quite short, like there. Little matte medium just to get rid of that fuzz at the end. I think that's as high up as I'm going to take it there. I'm going to fill in down here at the bottom a little bit. I feel like our house would be a little bit darker at the bottom, maybe from moisture soaking up or something. Let's take a bit of this dark color up under the eaves of the roof. We haven't painted the roof just yet. I want to make it nice and dark in here. Let's do that same thing on the entryway. A little bit darker. I especially want to make it darker up at the top and toward the inside, and we'll have it be a little bit lighter here where maybe a little bit extra light is hitting it. Maybe not quite so dark toward this edge at the top. I think that's pretty good. Well, maybe just a little bit down here. If your first layer is still quite wet, let it dry before you do this, because as the matte medium starts to dry, it gets a little tacky and you might pull some of that first layer off if it's still quite wet. And on the roof, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to make it darker toward the bottom of the roof area, because the top area might be getting a little bit more light. Again, following the angular shape, but taking my brush stroke in the same direction as the boards. We'll let that dry for a few minutes and we'll start working on the steps, which will lead us into the ground. All right, let's start on our porch. So I'm still using my bright, some matte medium, and some black. I'm gonna use a heavier load of black this time than I did on the house for the most part. And I'm gonna make a nice crisp line here. Bring it out just a little bit to indicate that there's a little bit of a platform that you could stand on there. Pick up a bit more matte medium and I'm just going to smooth that line, and it's kind of taking some of that over this bottom part, and that's going to be the stair that's facing us. But see, it's much thinner, and I don't really care. I put some marks there, and it's fine that they still show. A little bit more of that heavier black mixture. And you can't really see the stair top that I made here because of this tree, so we can just redefine it. See how I just made a little mark there with the end of my brush? And I'm going to pull that over horizontally. A little more matte medium, and again just below it, a little bit of that black paint is coming off of my brush, just to say that's the face of the stair, and we will add some highlights and shadows to that. A little bit more black, and we'll just say there's maybe a stair here that's kind of getting overtaken by the ground cover. And the rest of that, the ground cover is really just going to kind of blend into the stairs, and we can start on that actually. So I'm going to get a bit of a gray color. See, it's still pretty dark, but it's obviously gray. And I'm going to use my brush flat and just kind of scoot it. And see how I had that mixture kind of marbled on my brush, so I'm getting some areas that are quite dark with more black and some that are more mixed and kind of gray. I'm just lightly scratching it on here. I remember that I want to have a path here, so I'm not taking it all the way over top of that. Just kind of defining where that path is going to lead. So it's kind of coming this way. You can have it go any direction that you want. Flip my brush over because that other side was getting kind of, the paint was wearing off of it. I'm just going to break that line up a little bit. I think that's a good start for the ground. Maybe I'll go just a little bit lighter in that mixture. More matte medium. And I'll do that again down here. And that's quite a dramatic difference, but it's already on there. So right now I'm just going to leave it, kind of scrape it up into that first color. See, the texture of my canvas is kind of helping with that. The texture shows through and it's helping it look like a nice kind of a rugged ground. Let's get a little bit more matte medium. I'm just mixing that extra matte medium with the paint that's already on my brush. And I like that color for my path here. So very lightly right in there. Slightly overlap that dark color. Bring my path down this way. And we'll bring that down almost to the bottom of our shape here. Well, about to the bottom. I'm using my brush flat like this because that's how I get this texture. If I were to use it like this, I'm going to get a texture that's closer to the look of the house, and that's not what I want for the ground. Let's go a little darker. Same mixture, I just added a little more black because I want it to be quite dark here. I'm not going to put too much attention into this part just yet because I'm still going to do one more layer on the house, and I don't want to cover this, but I do want to take some bits up over the house once the texture is done there. So I'm just kind of lightly filling in this area with little versions of this gray color. There we go, kind of overlap the stairs a little. Let's get a tiny bit of that lighter color into the path just to give it a bit more texture. I know there's a little bit of a disconnect between the path and the ground there, but the ground isn't done, so I'm not worried about that. Just kind of playing with the colors and the shape that I get off of the texture right now. This is a really fun technique, and it can be used for anything. I think in September we also used this for water. Yeah, in the Misty Mountains, the first video we did in September, I used this exact same technique to do water, but it's really great for grasses, and you can do this with a filbert or a round brush. I even did it while I was messing around with this painting. Before filming, I did this with the liner brush, the long liner brush, and I may end up doing that later too with the liner brush. Now that I've got some of that darker color, let's just kind of get rid of that disconnect between the ground here and the path. My darker color, very light pressure, barely touching the canvas. Almost just kind of touching it and flicking it. Much better, I like that. All right, our boards are dry, so now we're gonna kind of make it pop a little bit. Yes, we can see the lighter color through it, but the house still just kind of looks flat and dark. So I'm still using my bright. I'm gonna load up with matte medium, just like I did when we were doing the black. And I'm gonna mix just a little bit of white into it. Nice transparent white mixture. And we're gonna do this the same way as we did the black, but I'm gonna be a little bit more selective about where I put it because I don't wanna lose all of the black. So I'm gonna kind of take a cue from the areas that are already light. So I think this side of my house is gonna be quite light because it already is. I've got kind of a light spot there, so I'm gonna start right there. Just like we did the black. Get some matte medium and smooth out any little fuzzy spots. I will take just a hint of it with quite a bit more matte medium, I think. Up into here. Just get a bit of that white. I'm pretty much gonna put some of this white mixture over probably about the entire house, but to varying degrees. Some of it you may not even really be able to tell the white is there. And in some areas it's gonna be quite a bit stronger. See how very faint that is? And as it dries and the matte medium becomes more transparent, some areas will not look quite as white as they do right now. See, our house is starting to get kind of a ghostly look to it, which is really what I loved about Stephen Gammell's art, is just everything seems so ghostly. Ever since I was a little kid, his artwork, it was so spooky and scary to me, but it was also so beautiful and just really magical. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not alone in saying that if you liked the scary stories to tell in the dark books, it was probably because the artwork creeped you out and felt very, very magic. I don't know if that sounds lame. I think that might sound lame, but that's how it seemed to me. Let's get a little bit of a heavier white mixture. I don't want to obliterate the colors and textures that I already have going on there, but I do want this side to be substantially lighter. So again, just slashing some on, a little bit of matte medium just to smooth out the fuzzy bits. I'm not trying to get rid of brush stroke lines. I'm not taking a bunch of that white up here because that's all really going to be in shadow. I think that's looking pretty good. I may just add a little bit more here. And remember to stand back and look at it. Not looking too bad. When I stood back, I decided that I want to have just a little bit more white right here. We have some areas that are quite dark in the house, so I want to make sure that I have some areas that are quite light as well. Now that looks like old weathered wood. I'm really happy with that. Let's add just a bit under the overhang at the entryway. So I really just took the white that was on my brush because it was quite heavy white, and I just added a little bit more matte medium to it. And I'm mostly going to concentrate this lighter color right around here and up, and maybe just a little here, but not a ton of it in here. Maybe just a very faint ghost of the color. And I feel like that's a bit brighter than I want right here, so I just picked up some matte medium and I'm using more pressure because that kind of helps scrape it off a bit. And if I still feel like that's too heavy, then once it's dried, I can go back over it with a little bit more black. I'm gonna really thin this down with some matte medium. Very, very, very thin. And we'll just add some hints of it throughout. We'll get some in here. I don't think that's too bad. Let's add just a little bit of this on the roof at the top. Maybe just a little bit heavier on the white right here. And just like with the black, where we did a couple layers, you could do that with the white if you like to. I don't think I need to. I think I'm pretty happy with the white in that single layer, but there's no rule or limit to how many layers you have to do. You do as many layers as you need to do to get the look that you want. Now I think I'm just gonna add the roof. So I'm gonna take my 1/2 inch angle, I just wet it in my jar with a little bit of water. I'm gonna pull a little bit of black out on one side of my brush. See how I have black on that side? And on the other side, I'm gonna pull out just a little bit of white. So I've got a little bit of a mixture. And I'm just gonna come to the edge and I'm just touching. Just kind of touching and pulling back just a bit. Let's grab a little more black than that. You can make it poke out a bit if you want, so it looks like old shingles. In fact, I like that. Same thing on this side. We'll start down here. Yeah, the way that's kind of poking up on the end is making it look like there's shingles kind of that have gotten old and they're kind of popping up. I'm gonna get a little bit more white and just add a little bit of a highlight onto the edges of some of these. They don't all need it. They certainly don't need a ton. And then we'll do the same thing on this piece of the roof. See, now I'm getting some of that white in there as I do the black, and that's perfect. All right, we're gonna let our house dry for a while before we come back and put in the windows and the door. So let's work on our ground just a little bit more. So I'm gonna go to my long lino brush, and I just use water. And again, the water is gonna help us get a smoother, crisp line here than matte medium will. But I also do run the risk of underbinding my paint, kind of like I did on my tree here. So once I'm done with this painting, I'll probably use a spray varnish so that I don't end up scrubbing away any of these delicate lines. You could also use soft body paint or even the liquid paints. That would help you not underbind it and still get your super crisp lines. So I'm just mixing a bit of water in with some black on my long liner brush. And I'm not gonna worry about coming up into these colors here because this ground isn't done yet. So I'm gonna start right in it. Notice I'm not getting my hand on my canvas. I wanna lose a little bit of control here because that's gonna give me more of a natural kind of gnarly look than if I'm very precise and controlled. And I think to start, remember how we laid our brush flat here? I'm gonna do that here. So I'm gonna lay my brush right on that line and just lightly kind of flick it down. See how it's kind of breaking up, and I really like that. Kind of the beginning of that look that we're going for. And now, I'm gonna say this piece that's hanging down low, super light pressure, I'm just gonna bring some little squiggly bits off the bottom of it. That was one of the things that was so fascinating to me in the books was, you know, these little bits of land that were kind of just hovering and had these little tendrils hanging off the bottom. So you can put a little bit more pressure on there, and they don't all have to be hanging straight down. In fact, we can kind of take one and curve it over that way. If it's a root or something, it might not be going straight down anyway. And you can put as many or as few on as you want. Notice I'm holding my brush quite far back, and I'm just waiting until the brush barely touches and just letting whatever happens happen. If I end up getting something that's a little bit thicker, that's okay. In fact, I'm gonna come from here, kind of bring a traily bit around and back up to there. Just get some really interesting shapes going. Let some of those lines kind of break up a little bit. Not all of my lines are crisp. I'm getting a nice variation. I feel like if it's too similar, if each line is too similar to the one next to it, it's just gonna look a little mechanical. So some of my lines are quite thick and move off in weird directions. Some of them are razor thin. Sometimes I move the brush really slow to get a controlled line. Sometimes I just flick it to let it do whatever it's gonna do. And it can take a little practice to get those super thin lines. So if you're having a hard time getting these, you know, hair thin lines with a brush like this, don't let that frustrate you. I do this a lot. And so don't feel like if you can't do it, that you must be doing something wrong. You're not. It's something that's going to take practice. You can't expect to, you know, just pick up a brush the first time and have the dexterity needed to do something like that. Painting little hair thin lines is something that I've always loved doing, and so I've put a lot of time and attention into it. And if you put a lot of time and attention into it, and if you have a good brush, then you will absolutely be able to do it. Let's get some fun little gross hangy bits over here. Oh, in fact, one of the other things I always see in those books is he'll do these things that almost look like a drip. So I'm going to come from here. I'm going to bring it down, and at the bottom, I stopped and just pushed a little bit harder. So now it's like a little drip. Don't worry if you go up above your ground like that, because we're not done there. I'm going to add some gnarly little grasses. I'm going to go back to my number 3 round, and I'm going to mix up a gray color. And we're going to work on some grasses. So right here where I have the black over top, I kind of want to mask it so it looks like an edge there. So I'm just kind of starting on it, and I'm going to flick some grasses up, holding my brush flat again. And you can wipe it with your finger if you want to soften that line. There we go. We'll just get it right up to that edge. And work on these grasses as much or as little as you like. If your first layer of grasses looks perfect to you, that's awesome. If it takes you a few layers to get to where you like the grasses, that's okay too. I'm going to go a little bit darker, I think. There we go. We'll start with some darker grasses there, pick up a little more white. Much better. Let's take a few of these dark grasses so it kind of overlaps the path from our viewpoint. That helps it look like nice, long, dingy old grasses. See, just short little brush movements. Touch and scoot it up only about 1/4 inch. I'm not really worried about filling in this area because I know I'm going to put a tree there and I'm going to end up messing with that anyway, so for now I'm not going to worry about it. Let's bring some of these up the edge of the house. Make sure that I cover the edge of the stairs a little bit so it looks nice and overgrown there. Up the bottom of the house a bit. Let's bring some of those over the edge of the steps here too. We'll say that path kind of branches off over here and goes toward the house. So I'm going to get a bit more of that lighter color, a similar color to what our path is over here. And I'm gonna go sideways with very light pressure and barely touching. Connect it up with that path. And then we can go darker to kind of bridge the gap. I'm not using the whole length of the brush here. I'm really only using about the front quarter of it, just on the end. Let's go darker here. We'll flick some grasses up over it. All right, let's start working on our tree. So I'm gonna go to my number 6 round brush, and I wet it in my jar a little bit. I'm gonna pick up some black. You can make your tree as big or as small as you want. I'm gonna have kind of a large tree. It kind of fills this area. So I'm just starting there. I'm just gonna define the width of the trunk for now. I'm not worried about filling all that in or anything. Just figuring out how big I want the tree. And as I come up, I'm kind of twisting my brush, kind of rolling it a little back and forth in my hand so that I don't get a perfectly straight and crisp edge on my tree. Because I want a gnarly old tree here. So we'll come up with a branch this way. And we'll have another main branch kind of coming up that way. And now I can go ahead and take care of filling that in properly, making sure that all of those holes are filled in, and reshape it as I need to. Notice I'm not worrying about the bottom of it just yet. We'll take care of that after. All right, my long liner brush, a little bit of water, some black paint. We're not gonna get really obsessive with these tree branches. We're gonna let them be super crazy and kind of out of control. Notice again, I'm holding my liner brush way back far. So I'm gonna just place it somewhere on there, and just like that. Some good pressure to start off with, and kind of letting that brush flick. And I don't even care if it doesn't fill in all the way. See right there, it didn't fill that branch in all the way, and I'm okay with that. I'm just gonna keep kind of doing that. Just really wild and crazy, and that got super wild and crazy, and that's okay. But see, I mean, I always preach to you about pressure, but pressure is really everything. See how fat that line is? And that's with this little tiny thin brush, just because I put some good pressure on it. So if you're having trouble getting fine lines, just check the pressure that you're putting on your brush. And let's do some over here. Make sure you let your branches overlap. Don't try and keep them separate from each other. I like that, you know, sometimes when we get these little knots or little breaks, whatever, it all goes toward adding character to our craggy old gnarly tree here. And using a brush like this, if you're not comfortable making these little flicky lines, just get an old canvas and practice being super loose. I'm gonna even add one kind of coming off of here. Practice being super loose. You know, what happens when you vary your pressure as you go, or you kind of move and stop and start, or just randomly flick it a little bit. You know, what kind of looks do you get? I love these little elbows that I get from doing that. I'm even gonna let a couple of these little branches go in front of my house. I think I like that pretty good. Let's go ahead and add some roots. So I'm still using my liner brush, and I'm just gonna come in here, very similar thing. See the pressure that I've got on here? Just kind of pull some little gnarly roots out. And we can add some grasses over the base too, to hide anything that we don't like. Now I'm gonna grab a bit of white, just loosely mix it in there. And let's add some highlights. Same thing, I'm just kind of curling my brush as I go. Pick up a little more black and just streak it over. Let it blend where it wants to blend, streak where it wants to. Really, I'm letting it do whatever it wants to do. There we go. I'm not going to get super detailed with these highlights on this tree. Just give it some. That was a bit much there, so I just scraped it back out. I think that's really all I'm going to do. I'll take a few up in here. Not a whole lot though. And if you're super uncomfortable doing this with this long liner brush, by all means use any brush that you are comfortable with. As always, you are not required to do things exactly the way I'm doing them. You are required to do things exactly the way that you want and need to do them. Let's go ahead and add some grasses at the bottom there. So I'm just going to mix up a gray color, very dark gray color. And I'm just kind of flicking them. Can you even do the sideways thing like we've been doing? Can even give the indication that maybe there's, I like to call them volunteers, little trees that like to sprout up in your yard and they just volunteered to grow there. So maybe there's a little volunteer growing right there. All kinds of crazy little stuff going on in this spooky landscape. Maybe there's some rocks in there. All right, let's get our windows and doors in. So I'm going to use my 1/2 inch angle brush, but use whatever you're comfortable with drawing. And if you want to draw them in with chalk first, that's perfectly okay. I'm a little shy about using the pink chalk right now, so I'm going to skip that. So I just picked up a little bit of water and some black. I'm going to do my door first, and I want it to look like the door is being partially hidden by this piece of wall. So I'm not going to draw a full door. I'm going to make a little line right about there. It's about a 1/2 inch from the top of the overhang. And I'm only going to go about half the width of a door. Bring that straight down. And we'll fill that in. And I want a little tiny window over here. Let's see, right there, just a little one. I'm going to do a little bit of a larger window here. Now I'm painting off to the side. I can't stand directly in front of it so that my cameras can still see. So if my window is kind of crooked, that's why. It's a little bit crooked. I'm not terribly worried about it. And then a little tiny window in the attic. Let's add some little highlights around the edges, not a lot. I didn't clean off my brush. I'm just gonna go straight into my white, tap a bit of that off. And then just on some of the edges, I'm just gonna touch. And some of the edges are gonna take more white than others. Some won't take much at all. I'm gonna put a little bit extra on the bottom. So we'll say that there's like a little bit of a windowsill poking out there. Maybe just a hint up here. I'm not dragging, I'm just kind of pressing the brush so it barely touches there. Let's do that around all of the windows. So if you get a part that kind of comes out a little farther than you want, then just take the highlight over that piece. And that will kind of hide it a little bit. And I think we need some on our support beam here. So I'm just gonna get a bit more white, and I will kind of streak it down this one side a little. All right, we're about done. We're just gonna highlight the stairs and the porch, and then I think I'm done. So I'm gonna go back to my number 8 bright. I wanna keep the top of the stairs fairly dark. So I'm gonna get some matte medium, quite a bit of matte medium, and I'm just gonna get a little bit of a gray color, quite a dark gray, but mostly matte medium, so it's very transparent. And I'm just gonna lightly streak a little bit of this color over it, and if it's too dark or too light, I just picked up a little bit of matte medium to streak over top of it, just like we did on the side of the house. And we'll add some of that color and matte medium here. And then maybe we'll go just a little bit lighter. I grabbed a little extra white, still quite a bit of matte medium. And we'll highlight the face of the stairs. Just very loosely. All right, I forgot one last thing. I want to put some boards over the windows. So I'm going to use my number 8 bright, a little bit of matte medium, a little bit of white, and I'm going to kind of mix it up so it's kind of grayish. It's almost pure white, just has a hint of gray to it. And just decide where a board is going to go. I'm going to use the edge of my bright to create the end of the board. And I'm just going to lightly, I'm not putting a ton of pressure so the board isn't getting too wide. I'm just going to streak it across from one side to the other. Grab just a hint of black on there and add some shadow areas. Grab just a hint of white and maybe a little highlight on this side. Let's do the same thing on our large window. So I'm going to take one from here. Add a little more matte medium in my paint mixture there. So I'll just grab a bit more paint and just go over it again. Whichever plank you do last is the one that's going to seem like it's on top. So I'm doing this one last. So when I overlap that first plank, it's going to seem like this one's on top. And there's your spooky haunted house painting, reminiscent of the old scary stories to tell in the dark books. I hope you enjoyed this, and even if you don't celebrate Halloween or like spooky things, I hope that you learned a few things that you can take from this painting to incorporate into your own works. As always, you can feel free to change this up however you like. You could do this in color, you could use chromatic black instead of Mars black, anything you like. If you need a little more Halloween in your life, you can check out this playlist right here. And then don't forget to subscribe and check out my website right here.